A VPS is a powerful tool because you can run almost anything in it. But most providers hand you a public server and quietly assume that you know how to keep it from becoming a liability. If you're running apps like OpenClaw or Hermes, one bad port bind or an exposed admin page is all it takes to turn your box into something strangers can poke at all day. It only takes one mistake for your server to start interacting with things you never intended, and that is a headache nobody needs. Most people try to fix this by stacking UFW rules, fail to ban, and odd SSH ports, while relying on a small act of faith to keep the bad actors out. I recommend a much cleaner setup where you just close everything. Join the server to Tailscale and only reach your services through your private Tailnet. Now, if you're watching this hoping for a one-click install, I have to tell you that it just doesn't exist. We're going to get into the weeds on this one, but once you handle the confusing parts for one machine, you never really have to do it again for any other host that you run. Now, in this video, I'm going to show you the full process that I use on a Hostinger Ubuntu VPS to make sure everything is locked down tight. We will install Tailscale, set up tags and access rules, and make sure your apps work without leaving random doors open to the internet. If the network path is wrong, the rest of your security only looks safe. So we're going to do it the right way. I use Tailscale because it's incredibly easy to use. And while some folks may prefer other tools, this is the method that works best for my workflow. Now, before we dive in, if you like content like this, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I'm currently just 5,000 subscribers away from the first YouTube plaque, and I've noticed that when I don't ask, people tend to forget to subscribe. When I do ask, the subscriptions come in fast, so please hit that button and help me reach that goal. The standard VPS setup seems simple enough when you first get started. You get a public IP address, you open SSH so you can actually use the thing, and then you follow Docker guides that map ports to the world because that's what quick start guides love to do. Your app goes live along with your dashboard, but half the time you probably didn't mean for either one of them to go public. This approach breaks down fast because automated scanners do not care what your app actually does. They don't care if you're running OpenClaw or Hermes or a side project that you named when you were too tired to think of something clever. These bots just look for open sockets on public IPs, and if your server answers the door, they'll keep trying different keys and options until something finally slips. Most people treat this like a filtering problem where they try to decide which ports should stay open and which ones need rate limits. They might even change the SSH port to something less obvious, but that still keeps the same public model where you're exposing the machine and then trying to make that exposure safer. Tailscale changes the entire model by letting your VPS join a private network with your other devices. The server gets its own Tailscale IP and a clean magic DNS name, which means you connect through your Tailnet instead of the public address. Now, when I say we're going to lock down all the ports, I mean every single one of them. I set the vendor firewall to block everything, because the point isn't to polish an exposed server, it's to stop needing that exposure in the first place. Now, before we even touch the Tailscale config, our first job is getting this box into a state where nothing on the public internet can touch it. Now, this video is sponsored by Hostinger, and I really enjoy working with them because I actually use their services for my own projects almost every single day. This isn't a case of me reading a script and pretending to use a product I've never touched, because I currently have 3 separate machines running with them for different needs. One box handles my production instances for N8N and SearchNG and Postgres, while a second machine exists purely for these videos, so I can destroy and rebuild it as many times as I need to. My third server is what I'm using right now for OpenClaw and Hermes, which shows you just how much I rely on their infrastructure. If you want to set up a VPS and follow along with this project, head over to hostinger.com/mattw to get started. That link takes you straight to the virtual private server setup page where you can pick a plan like KVM1 or KVM2, though I usually recommend KVM2 for most of the things we do here. You can choose how long you want the machine to run, and while a 2-year plan gives you the best value, remember that you're only committing to the hardware and not the specific software you choose to run on it. Make sure to select a server location, and you can enable daily backups if you like. Then move on to the operating system. I almost always suggest starting with a clean base OS like Ubuntu, and since you can change this later with just a few clicks, don't stress too much about the initial choice. Before you hit continue, use the coupon code MATTW to grab an extra 10% off your order. The rest of the setup is very simple, and even though I can't show you the exact screens, since I'm already a customer, you'll find the process is quite intuitive. Once the server's up and running, I immediately jump into 2 specific security steps to keep things safe. First, I head into the Security tab and open the firewall settings to make sure everything is set to block by default. Now, you might worry that locking the doors like this will keep you out of your own machine, but I promise you'll still have access through the management console. After the firewall is active, I go into the settings to add my SSH key so I can log in securely later on. If you manage a whole fleet of servers, you only have to upload your key once, and it's available for all of them. With those 2 tasks finished, click the terminal link at the top right of your dashboard. You'll need to log in using root as your username and the root password that you created during the initial setup process. Now it's time to run my bootstrap script so the machine starts in a clean, organized state instead of the messy default configuration you usually get with a fresh server. I keep this script as a GitHub gist and update it constantly. And what it does is set up a non-root user with all the basic tools I need to be productive. It installs the fish shell for a more modern experience, though you can skip that if you prefer a more antiquated terminal like Bash or ZSH. And it handles the setup for sudo and the GitHub CLI. It also pulls in Node.js and NPM before hardening the SSH configuration by disabling root login and password authentication entirely. This won't kick you out of the browser terminal you're currently using, but it ensures that nobody can try to brute force their way into your server from the public internet. You really need to test the box before you move on to the next phase of the project. Grab another machine on your regular home internet and try to ping the public IP or connect to the ports you think might be open. If we did our job right, those connections should fail completely. Back inside the VPS, your containers and local services should still be able to talk to each other without any issues. When the server goes quiet to the outside world but stays fully functional on the inside, you've reached the perfect baseline. This setup ensures that Tailscale becomes the only clean path into your system, which is exactly where we want to be. With the box locked down tight, we can finally bring in Tailscale to act as the secure bridge that we'll actually use for management. Now, before we start the installation, you'll need to head over to tailscale.com and create a free account if you don't have one yet. Our main goal here is to gain total control over which machines and ports on your private network this server is allowed to talk to. Tailscale uses access control lists, or ACLs, to handle this, but they can be a little confusing if you've never used them before. The system doesn't really let you write negative rules, so you can't just give everything access and then block one specific machine. Instead, you control access using host names, IP addresses, or tags, and using tags is definitely the easiest way to manage a growing list of services. Inside your Tailscale admin panel, look for the Access Control section where you can choose between a visual editor and a JSON editor. I find the JSON editor much easier to work with, so that's what I'll be using for this video. I'm going to use tags for almost everything, but I also want to point to my local machine using a simple alias. To do this, add a host section and map a name like my desktop to the actual Tailscale IP address of your computer. Next, move down to the Tag Owners section to define the tags you want to use. I'm adding tag prod for my live services and tag video for the machines I use for these tutorials. And I'll leave the owner array empty so it defaults to the admin. Since I built this setup with OpenClaw in mind, I'm also going to add a specific tag for agent to keep things organized. Tailscale lets you define permissions using either ACLs or grants, and while that sounds redundant, grants is the newer and better way to do things. Most online examples still use the old ACL syntax, but since grants are the future of the platform, we're going to stick with those today. In the grants section, create an object where the source is set to your main tags like prod and video, and set the destination to include agent, prod, and video for me. By setting the IP to a star symbol, you're telling Tailscale that your trusted machines can access everything on the network. However, since the agent machine only has the agent tag, it currently can't talk to anything at all. To fix that, add a second grant where the source is tag agent and the destination is the host alias we created earlier. Set the IP to TCP:11434 so the agent can only talk to your local machine on that one specific port. We could have used a host name here, but since I wipe and rebuild these VPS instances constantly, the IP addresses change while the tags stay the same. This is all the configuration we need to do inside this specific file. If you made a typo or logic error, the editor will highlight the mistake as soon as you try to hit save. Now we just need to assign these tags to our actual hardware. If this feels a bit overwhelming and you're tempted to skip the security steps, you might want to reconsider running a VPS at all. If you set up a tool like OpenClaw or Hermes on an unsecured server, it isn't a question of if you'll get hacked, but simply a matter of when it will happen. Some people suggest running everything on your local machine to avoid this, but that creates a whole different set of headaches that most popular creators don't bother telling you about. If you already have machines showing up in your Tailscale list, you can assign tags by clicking the three dots next to the device and selecting Edit ACL Tags. Just go through your list and make sure every machine has the right label for its role. Now we can finally add our new server to the network. Click the Add Device button and select Linux, and make sure you choose the Agent tag before you do anything else. You don't need to mess with any other settings, so just generate the installation script, copy it to your clipboard, paste that command into your server's terminal, and hit Enter. And within a few seconds, your VPS will pop up inside your Tailscale dashboard. Now, in my own admin panel, I've actually turned on device approval under the device management settings. This means that even with the right script, I still have to manually click Approve before a new machine is allowed to join my private network. At this point, you should be able to log into your server from your local computer using SSH over the secure Tailscale connection. Just remember to use the Tailscale IP address or the host name we set up, and make sure you're logging in with the non-root user you created earlier. I keep a specific block in my SSH config file so I can just type SSH OC to jump straight into the server without remembering any long IP addresses. If you run a curl command to check on Olama, you should see the message saying it's running perfectly. If you want to test your security, go back into Tailscale, comment out the grant for that machine, and you'll see the connection fail. Maybe not immediately, but it'll fail eventually. Now, you can install whatever software you want on that server and sleep easy knowing it can only talk to the specific services that you've allowed, in this case, Olama on my machine. If you want to go even further and block the server from accessing the general internet, things get a bit more complex. You could try using a tool like UFW, but that gets messy when IP addresses change over time. A better approach might be using a dedicated proxy server, but that's a deep topic that really deserves its own video. The big win here is a VPS that still runs your apps exactly how you expect. But now the VPS firewall blocks incoming access, and your Tailnet rules decide where it can go instead of leaving the door wide open. This setup keeps tools like OpenClaw, Hermes, and SSH available for your use without them sitting out on the open internet waiting for the wrong kind of attention. I personally keep Tailscale installed on every single one of my devices, including my phone and my tablet, so I always have a secure path back to my gear. If you want to see the specific reverse proxy setup I use for these boxes, or if you're curious about how I configure OpenClaw or Hermes, let me know in the comments below. I really enjoy putting these guides together, and I'm already looking forward to the next one. The main thing I want you to take away from this is a change in how you think about security. Instead of trying to figure out how to protect an open port, you should be asking why that port needs to exist in the first place. When you start with that mindset, the rest of the configuration is much easier to wrap your head around. Tailscale becomes your only path in, your ACLs decide who is allowed to talk, and your Docker apps and other apps stop leaking out through default settings that you might have forgotten to check. This approach also solves a massive headache that hits almost every small server owner at some point. Most of your trouble won't come from a sophisticated hacker, but rather from a simple mistake in a compose file or an app that binds to every interface by default. You might set up a dashboard and tell yourself you'll hide it later, but then life happens and you'll never get around to it. By shutting down the public side first and adding the VPS to your Tailnet, you're actually removing entire categories of mistakes before they can turn into a long night of troubleshooting. Now, I hope you found this video interesting, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye. Whew, it's a long one.